In studio by the director of the Icamagu Heritage Institute, Dr. Nokuzola Mndende. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mama. Perhaps let's begin really where it matters. What is your discomfort with the idea of black feminists?
Our first problem is that we discuss our issues in a foreign language. So once we talk about African feminism, I don't know what that is all about. And secondly, if I look at the history of feminism itself, well, I've studied feminist theology versus humanist theology. You'll find that these things started with the white feminists, and their issues are totally different from our own issues.
And perhaps that is where the conversation really needs to go. Black feminists do not disregard the fact that, and understanding of history of feminism, that it has its roots in Western feminist ideology. However, there is an appreciation that there is a African and a black female women reality that has not been given space, both in terms of the intellectual discourse, but also in terms of general the archiving of that history. It's not necessarily true that on the grounds that we use this, we speak about these terms in a language that is not our own, that they become invalid. I think a young poet and writer by the name of Kolega Putuma has a very interesting poem, right, that locates her own experience and understanding of feminism versus her grandmother's. And if you'll allow me, I will quote briefly that poem. Yes. She says, in explaining this dynamic nature of feminism, she says, "My grandmother's feminism doesn't sound like mine. I say patriarchy. She says, fuck, I'm a daughter. It's the same, really, different eras." So she says, and she argues, and this is an argument that is made by quite a number of feminist scholars, that even as the idea of the language of feminism, the idea of patriarchy and of intersectional politics and so on, are new ideas, they are not necessarily ideas that the concept itself or the concept itself is not necessarily new, that throughout history on the African continent, we've had women who have espoused the values, the ideas and the beliefs that feminists today are fighting for and about.
You know, my worry is to use the term fighting for, because you know the generation gap between myself and yourself. If we look at the role of, let me put it as the role of women or their liberation. Let us put it into context, because what you as Azania is having now is different from what my grandmother had, because we have got pre-colonial role of women, and we had colonial, which distorted the role of African women, and then we have yourselves now in the post-colonial period. So because in the pre-colonial, when we look at this, we must look at these three eras, because if we look at them now, we are confusing issues.
Radical black feminist ideology does not disregard the experience of women in pre-colonial Africa or post-colonial Africa.
Yes.
In fact, it is rooted precisely in the recognition of those realities. And I mean, I'm very worried often about how we tend to be very romantic about how we want to understand the role of women, or, you know, and even the way the language we use, the role of women in pre-colonial Africa. There's a very intense romanticization of that period in our time that I think begs analysis.
You may label them as being romanticized. During the pre-colonial period, there were gender roles. You had your role as a woman, you had a role as a man, number one. And with these gender roles, as a woman in your birthright, you have to perform this. That is why. Another thing that you are having as a problem is to generalize the term woman, because in our languages there is a difference between a married woman. I'm married somewhere, I've got other roles, and at home I've got roles, and I've got my birthrights, which my brother has got the birthrights. Now, what happened during the colonial period? Because even when you talk about patriarchy, the way you talk about patriarchy today, you include colonialism. Colonialism which came with a patriarchal God. Colonialism which came with a patriarchal trinity. Colonialism which came with many things that are distorting our own identity. And it's when now we we're having spokespersons who are seeing our culture as oppressive and their culture as not oppressive. So until African women themselves decide to approach African liberation from their own perspective and not from the Western perspective, we'll never reach total liberation. Because even those women who are speaking on our paper, you must understand that there's a question of race here and there's a question of classism, even amongst ourselves. We have got those women who are urban, who are educated, and those women, they dictate to those women in the rural areas that you don't know this, you are oppressed. Oppression, I must say, I am oppressed. You can't say, Mama, you are oppressed. I must say, I feel the heat here. And when you're talking about those women who have led, we are having women even today. For instance, I'm the firstborn woman. Whether my brother likes it or not, those are my roles, and he must be told. But what happened, now coming to the question of romanticizing it, what happened now with our own patriarchy, instead of using what our forefathers did, they have become greedy and sexist, and they are misogynists. So this is what is happening these days. This is what we must be fighting for. I must make an example of a girl who was beaten in KwaZulu-Natal because she was wearing pants. And those men were saying, this is not our culture. Women must not wear pants. Now ask them, which culture is that? Because pants, ibhlukwe, is an African word for brook. It came with the white people. So that's not our culture. Which culture are you talking about? So which culture am I romanticizing?
Okay. We continue the conversation after the break.